The areas of the flywheel universe shown in Figure 2, Chapter 2 could readily be drawn to the cylindrical. Then every connected land area of the celestial and the terrestrial could be undulating through the power of every area's magnetic energy. The undulating would be T and away from the sun, and the sun would be moving in its unchanging course along the entire universe. Structure: the sun's perpetual journey along the universe course would be that of paternal supervision for the universe whole. Hence the Earth's daily movement in conjunction with similar movement of all celestial areas would be toward and away from the sun's path. Such movement would account for day and night, the sun's continuous movement along the universe course, would at one season of our terrestrial year be toward the terrestrial area. At another period of the year, it would be moving away from terrestrial areas, moving toward and away from terrestrial would be equivalent to the sun, moving in the same course but moving slower in the summer months than in the winter months, and both conditions would be equal to the sun's remaining always on the same course, but the dispensing greater solar energy at one season of the year. Either of the three conditions will adequately explain the experience. Seasons and the longer and shorter days of our terrestrial year, the same conditions could produce the same results for other areas of the universe whole. They too experience long days and short days and seasons, and their periods of night and day vary. This undulating movement of the terrestrial area and all other inseparable areas of the universe whole may be likened to the individual's breathing or expansion and contraction of the lungs. There are known variations in the speed or intensity of individual breathing under normal conditions, and there is at other times an abnormal breathing, which may be drastically slower or faster depending upon individual condition. Accordingly, there develops constantly varying speeds of breathing among all the Earth's individuals. At all times, areas of the universe would also express multiple variations in the speed of their daily undulating movement toward and away from the sun's course in space, and the variations in movement of areas of the whole would be consistent with continuous unity of the universe. Whole normal breathing of individuals has a range of from 14 to 24 cycles each minute, whereas under extraordinary conditions, particularly in cardiac and respiratory diseases, the number of breaths or respirations may be increased to 50 or decreased to therefore it may be discerned that there exists constant variation of the speed among all terrestrial individual moving toward the same place. Continued living each individual of the terrestrial may be considered a distinct area of humanity, and each individual attains the daily and yearly goal with varying speed of movement. Our land areas of the universe may move with different speeds at different times, and each remain an inseparable part of the connected universe. The terrestrial area's daily lung expansion, or a partial undulating movement toward the sun's course, could be of approximately 12 hours duration. The terrestrial daily lung expansion would begin at about 12 through midnight and attain maximum daily expansion at about 12 noon. That maximum expansion would bring the terrestrial to a space location where the sun would apparently be directly overhead. Then for the next 12 hours, there would be Earth breath contraction. It would complete the daily undulation, and it would return the Earth to its lowest point in space and most remote from the sun's course. That would be the point at approximately 12 midnight, about the middle of the terrestrial daily lung contraction or movement from the highest 12 noon point in space. Darkness would begin to envelop terrestrial areas. The approach of darkness would be experienced at some terrestrial points as early as 4 p.m. and at other points as late as 8 p.m., and it would result from the increased distance of such terrestrial points from the sun's course in space. Then the next day's terrestrial breath expansion would bring to some terrestrial points at 6 a.m. The so-called the light of dawn would increase until the breath expansion reached its peak at about 12 noon. The peak of expansion would bring the terrestrial to its highest point in space, where it would receive most of solar energy. Daylight would prevail for part of the period of time terrestrial lung contraction. As the terrestrial moved away from the highest sun point, it may be seen that as each area of the terrestrial reached its high point in space, it would recede with the daily contraction, but another point of the terrestrial whole would take the high point position, vacated hence when the Boston, Massachusetts point of the terrestrial was far removed from the high point of its area's daily breath expansion. Hong Kong, China, and other terrestrial areas would be approaching the high point. Some areas of the terrestrial would experience noon. While others were experiencing total darkness, the same condition would apply for all celestial areas of the universe whole. They too would be expanding and contracting in common with all terrestrial areas. So as it is with the individual human body's respiratory variation, as the daily expansion and contraction of all areas of the terrestrial and the celestial would correspond naturally. The daily respiration of universe areas would be much longer than the human body's respiration, though ever bearing the same relation as inseparable parts of the universal daily undulation in space. Some terrestrial and celestial areas would move toward the sun's course and space at greater speeds than others. That condition would develop variations in time of arrival at the high and low space points, representing complete expansion and complete contraction. The difference in speed of movement would in turn develop different hours and minutes for the various terrestrial and celestial areas to experience the sun as being apparently directly overhead. It would likewise develop for terrestrial and celestial areas of the universe. Whole variations in midnight, the arrival of terrestrial areas at the lowest space point, most remote from the sun's course, would not occur at the same time. Hence it can be understood that 12 and noon would not apply to all terrestrial areas, and that would hold regardless of what movement the Earth and the Sun prescribed. Many terrestrial and celestial areas would factually experience noon at different hours and different minutes of the hours. The theory of globular isolation makes allowance for such difference in time. But 12 noon is, exceptor throughout the terrestrial, is a matter of convenience. The following word illustration of a comparative movement to be observed at terrestrial level seems pertinent and may assist visualization of the daily universal undulation. One can readily visualize a frail craft as it participates in the rolling water motion of a calm lake or river. Visualization of the same craft obliged to participate in the violent wave and upheaving motion of a turbulent body of water will materially assist mental comparison of values. It can be discerned that in the case of turbulent water, the bow of the frail craft may be almost upright in space, while the stern could be on the surface of the water. Thus, the craft would be seemingly standing on end, and every other area of the craft H from B to stern would occupy a different position and space while retaining unity with the craft. The mental portrait of terrestrial and celestial land areas, making a unified daily undulation on the broader ocean of infinite space, may be enlarged as follows. Add to that single craft a 100 or 1,000 similar craft, have the bow of one scraping the stern of a connected craft along the entire length of Unearth in craft comprising the whole. Each craft and every part of each craft would reach its necessary high point or position in the relative space where the undulation prescribed the highest point to be attained in space away from the water's surface, would not and need not be the same for all parts of all craft comprising the undulating whole. Each craft and its various parts would in time return to a momentary position of even key or near even key on the surface of the water, and any change of speed for the undulation would affect the time spent by various parts of the undulation at the low water surface point and the high space point. The highest point to be attained in space away from the water's surface would correspond to the highest point to be attained by certain terrestrial and celestial areas in their daily undulation toward and away from the infinite space path, represent the sun's course, and the lowest even keel or near even keel position to be attained by all both parts would be symbolic of the terrestrial and celestial lyre, lowest point of daily undulation toward and away from the sun's course. Some parts of the combined terrestrial and celestial or areas of the universe whole would, like the undulating boats, reach the high space point simultaneously, but never could all parts of the unified terrestrial and celestial daily undulation attain the high point at the same time. The same holds true for the completion of the daily undulation, which brings every area of the universe whole to the lowest point in space. Away from the sun's course, that point would be midnight. But under no circumstances could it be 12 midnight for all areas of the combined terrestrial and celestial. At the same time, accordingly, all up movement to the highest or sun's course point and space and front, it would represent the daily course from midnight to noon for terrestrial and celestial land areas. The second phase of the daily undulation would be away from the high sun's course point in space, toward the lowest point in space, that would be movement from the high noon point to the low midnight point time, would have no bearing on the situation, though the time of arrival at high point and low point would vary for areas of the undulation. The arrival at high point would be noon for each area, and arrival at low space point would be midnight for that area. The foro demonstrates how day and night could be experienced without any necessity for isolating the Earth and other realistic land areas of the universe. The universe can survive as a unit, and every land and sky area of the universe can continue to be connected. Yet every area of the universe, Hall can prescribe daily movement toward and away from the sun. In a consideration of the seasons, it is shown that the sun and its yearly course would be directly over some terrestrial and celestial areas at certain periods when the universe H was prescribing its ulation toward the sun's course in space. The ulating approach of various universe areas to the sun's course would not imply that the sun was in fact overhead. For the majority of universe areas, the sun would be anywhere but overhead for the greater part of the year, regardless of the sun's apparent overhead position. Direct relation to the sun and direct relation to the sun's course are quite different conditions. The former provides direct perpendicular benefits from the sun when it is the least distance away from a particular universe area, whereas the latter condition would permit only of the sun's benefits at any angle, and the increase of angle would increase the sun's distance from a particular area. Therefore, the day's length and the seasonal change of areas would be influenced not only during the brief yearly weeks when an area had direct perpendicular relation to the sun. In its course, the change would also be felt for a period while the sun in its course was approaching direct perpendicular relation to any area, as well as when the sun was moving on its course away from a particular area. As the sun moved in its course, there would develop for other terrestrial and celestial areas the same seasonal change. It would be experienced as the sun approached to perpendicular relation with such an area, and the change would be most marked when the sun had reached direct perpendicular relation. Then, as the sun continued on its course, away from perpendicular relation with the particular area, they would develop another seasonal change for the particular area. Thus, some terrestrial and celestial areas would be entering their summer season, while numerous other terrestrial and celestial areas would be entering their winter season. Some areas could be simultaneously experiencing the longest day of summer,